Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Interrogating Presidential Papers, the Ferdinand Marcos Diaries. This webinar is presented by the Phoenix Arts and Culture Committee. May I call on our host for today? She is the CEO of CLFG Capital, Ms. Maret Fuliosco Bautista.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another exciting webinar organized by the Phoenix Arts and Culture Committee. It's our third webinar for 2022 entitled Interrogating Presidential Papers, the Ferdinand Marcos Diaries. The title itself is already intriguing, right? I am Maret Fuliosco Bautista, your MC for today. I was hoping that our webinar would already be face-to-face. Unfortunately, many are still hesitant to do face-to-face meetings. Besides, traveling to a meeting place can be very expensive given the high cost of fuels nowadays. But today's webinar will treat us to a safer, more affordable, and a unique form of travel, a trip back in time as we examine the memoirs of former President Ferdinand Marcos. As finance people, I suppose the closest thing to a diary that many of us keep would be our personal budget spreadsheets, which may still reveal a lot about who we are. Nowadays, we have short format vlogs or YouTube to instantaneously update us about people's goings on and lifestyle changes. In the past, however, it was quite rare to get into the mind of famous, or rather infamous people. Anyway, today we are lucky and privileged to have as guest speaker one of our nation's most esteemed historians to talk to us about the Marcos Diaries. Hopefully, he will give us a revealing peek into the mind and character of former President Marcos during the course of his extended stay in the country's highest office. As mentioned, our speaker is a full-fledged historian, and therefore, as our discussions today will center on history. History, as we all know, relates to past events, not current events like surveys and rallies, or of future events such as the May 9 elections. So before we turn the pages of the diaries, may we call on the active social civic community leader and member of Phoenix Arts and Culture Committee, Ms. Asuncion Sony Aguilar, for the invocation.
Let us place ourselves in the presence of God, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, your love is unconditional. In our human frailty, help us to surrender to your will as we continue to face significant transitions in our lives. Prepare our hearts for what you already prepared for us. Help us see ourselves the way you see us and walk the way you intended us to live. Gift us and all our leaders the moral courage to follow the way to peace. Remove the violence from our hands and lies and hate from our lips. Help us to seek you and you alone, Jesus, for your power is made perfect in our weakness. We know that the hardest battles are fought within us, but in the silence of our soul, Lord, we give you all that we are, and we thank you for giving us all that is you. Amen.
Thank you, Sony, for that impassioned and relevant prayer. To continue, may we now call on the person responsible for organizing the very informative and interesting series of webinars we have had, the chairperson of the Arts and Culture Committee, the hardworking and brilliant Attorney Maria Alicia Lia San Juan, partner at Picasso, Boycottan, and Fidel Law Offices, to formally welcome us today to today's webinar. Leah?
Thank you very much, Maret. Dear fellow Phoenix members and guests, welcome to today's talk, Interrogating Presidential Papers, the Ferdinand Marcos Diaries. We are very fortunate to have with us a very famous and sought-after historian, Professor Ambeth Ocampo. There are those who may believe that the topic for today's talk is very relevant and timely, especially because the former president's son is himself running for president in the upcoming elections. However, this is not the purpose of this talk. Our talk today is not intended to be a partisan discourse, but a historical discussion about Ferdinand Marcos' diaries. It is in this context that this talk is being given, and we hope that the audience will appreciate and treat it as such. The diaries are a voluminous compilation comprised of over 2,000 pages of the former president's personal notes. Our speaker will take us through important events from the 70s to the early 80s, as seen from the first-person perspective of Mr. Marcos. He will annotate some of the entries in the diary with his expert interpretation as a historian. This is a history lesson of sorts, and for about an hour or so, we will be students again in Professor Ocampo's classroom. I hope that you will all enjoy this talk. Thank you very much to our speaker, Ambeth, and we know you are very busy, and we are so grateful that you were able to give us some time this afternoon for this talk. Thank you very much to everybody, and good afternoon.
Thank you, Leah, for that warm welcome and for the reminder that this is a non-partisan discourse. The Phoenix Arts and Culture Committee is consistent with bringing only the best speakers and topics. Thanks to our liaison director, Mr. Domingo Go, who is also a Phoenix board member and an independent director of Alliance Select Foods International. I'd like to call on Mr. Domingo Go to do the honors of introducing our speaker.
Thank you very much, Maren. Colleagues in Phoenix, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Those of us who do not keep diaries sometimes wonder why some people keep them. Some say writing a diary helps one to improve one's thinking processes, aside from helping to organize one's thoughts and make them apprehensible. Still others say that it helps to record one's feelings about certain experiences or opinions as one goes about recording daily events. And still others believe that the diary is a good place to write one's goals, ambitions, and aspirations, and thus enabling one to stop, take a step back, and reflect on oneself. This afternoon, we are indeed privileged to have with us a much sought after and noted public historian who will share with us his insights into the diaries of the 10th President of the Republic of the Philippines, Ferdinand Edralin Marcos, who governed from 1965 to 1986, 9 years of which were under martial law from 1972 to 1981. A professor and former chair of the Department of History of the Ateneo de Manila University, he is also known as a writer, art historian, and curator and cultural administrator. He has published over 30 books, the most recent being Martial Law, Looking Back 15, and Queridas de Rizal, Looking Back 16 by Anvil Publishing, and Yaman, History and Heritage in Philippine Money, published by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. He also writes a widely read editorial page column for the Philippine Daily Inquirer and moderates growing Facebook and Instagram pages. As a public historian, his research covers the 19th century Philippines, its art, culture, and the people who figure in the birth of the nation. Since 2011, he has delivered public lectures on Philippine history, known as the History Comes Alive series, primarily at the Ayala Museum to sold-out crowds. He has likewise served as president of the City College of Manila and the Philippine Historical Association, the co-chair of the Manila Historical and Heritage Commission, and the chairman of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, while concurrently serving as chairman of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. He has held appointments as visiting research fellow.
Domeng, you're currently on mute for some reason. The past 5 seconds.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back. 5 seconds lang. Thank you.
Okay. So he has likewise served as president of the City College of Manila and the Philippine Historical Commission, the co-chair of the Manila Historical and Heritage Commission, the chairman of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, while concurrently as chairman of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. He has held appointments as a visiting research fellow in Kyoto University, the Chulalongkorn University in Thailand, and as a visiting professor at Sophia University in Tokyo. Our speaker has been conferred the Order of Civil Merit with the rank of Encomienda or Commander by the Kingdom of Spain in 2007, and the French Order of the Arts and Letters by the Republic of France in 2008 for his contributions to the arts and letters and for his support of cultural exchanges between the Philippines and France. He is also a recipient of the Order of La Candula with the rank of Bayani, one of the highest civilian awards of the Republic of the Philippines, as well as the Presidential Medal of Merit. In 2016, he was awarded the prestigious Fukuoka Prize Academic for his contributions to Philippine history and culture, being the fifth Filipino to be so honored with the recognition. It is therefore my honor and privilege this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to now turn over the floor to our distinguished speaker, Professor Ambeth Ocampo. Professor Ocampo, you now have the virtual floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Doming. Can the people see my slides? I don't know how I cannot see is it okay?
Are you sharing it now, Prof? Ako, I'm not
Yeah,
seeing.
it's supposed to share, but anyway, I'll do it all over again. Yeah, these are one of the things in.
Yeah, it's showing now.
Okay, now I'll just fix it. So
it's showing now.
We thought it was all okay, but anyway, just give me a few minutes to fix the screen.
It is showing now.
Yeah, but it's not correct screen. It shows my notes.
Shows the note.
Okay. Okay, so that's fine.
All good.
All good. Thank you very much for inviting me to deliver this what was part of my professorial chair lecture at the PUP, the Philippine Polytechnic University of the Philippines. No, this was a series of lectures that we did on Philippine history, and I had called it there were two lectures, no, on two Ilocanos. One was Juan Luna, the other one was Ferdinand Marcos, and I arranged them under the title "Fruit of the Poisonous Tree," in both in its literal and its legal sense. No? The legal sense being that it is tainted evidence or evidence improperly collected is not admissible in court. But then the same also applies in the salawikain or our proverb that says kung ano ang puno, yun din ang bunga. And I'm using this to talk about historiographical problems. No? How are we to understand, for example, the murder of Juan Luna's wife? I had given a talk to Phoenix some years ago. But much of that has already been updated because I have found many online, a lot of newspaper accounts of the murder that have not been used before. And this one will be on the Marcos Diaries, which we hope will be published in the near future by the Ateneo Press. Anyway, my talk this afternoon has just 4 points. No, I will talk about, should we let history decide? Because most people say when we talk about people and events that we let history decide, meaning that we wait 10, 20 years, as Teodoro Agoncillo used to say, before we can actually write historically about an event or a person. Okay, I will talk about presidential papers as a vital primary source. Then I will talk about the Diaries of Ferdinand Marcos, how I got the diaries, how they are edited, and partly what these contain. And I will end with reflections on the uses and the abuses of history. Okay. Now, should we let history decide? After many years displayed in Batak Ilocos Norte, the body of Ferdinand Marcos was buried in a small private ceremony at the Libingan ng mga Bayani in November 2016. And there was a big outcry because although he is legally entitled to be buried in this cemetery because he is both a war veteran and a former president of the Philippines, there is a problem because it says libingan ng mga bayani. So if it was just called, the National Cemetery or whatever, maybe it would not have provoked as much problems. But there was widespread protest that accompanied the burial, and this brought out again, the questions about Marcos's place in Philippine history and how he should be evaluated. Now, when we think about it, you must think of the word bayani. I want to talk a bit about this because we all know a bayani is a hero. But in my research, I've looked at Tagalog dictionaries from the 17th century to the 19th century, Spanish vocabularies. A bayani is not just a hero; he is somebody with extraordinary abilities, strength. He has qualities of the gods. He does something noble, or he's a nobleman. He is dakila. He is victorious, and that's why you say mamayani, to be victorious. And he can also be the leading man in a play or a movie. That's why the hero in a movie in Tagalog we call bida, from the Spanish vida, which is life, and the villain is called kontrabida, which means against life. Bayani comes or is rooted in the word bayan. And when I looked at the dictionaries for bayan, I found this strange thing that defines bayan as a space between where you are and the sky. I've never seen that before. Bayan, as we know today, is either a town, a municipality, a pueblo, even a nation. Bayan can pertain to people or citizens. That's why we have the Tagalog word mamamayan. Or you can have people from the same place. That's why it's called kababayan or kabayan. And this one also, I didn't see, bayan also referred to the time of day, or malalim ang araw, malalim ang bayan. And it also pertained to weather, masamang bayan, mabuting bayan. But the most apt definition of bayani I found in a Jesuit dictionary from the 19th century that says that a bayani is a person who volunteers or offers free service towards a cooperative task or a common endeavor. Something that we all know today as bayanihan. And we don't do it anymore, but in olden times when you said bayanihan, it meant that if you had a neighbor who was moving to another place, the neighborhood would carry the nipahat and transplant it to another place. And this was bayanihan. People did this for their neighbor without actually being paid for this. And I have seen maybe the last ones, this was taken around 1950. I found this in the Sunday Times magazine. People were still carrying people's houses. I mean, now, if you live in a condo, you cannot carry your house. But it gives you a sense of what bayan, bayani, and bayanihan actually mean. Now, history is all about remembering. But most people do not realize that history is also about forgetting. Ferdinand Marcos wanted to be remembered by creating in what is now known as the Palispis Highway. It used to be known, still is referred to as the Marcos Highway going up to Baguio. There was this big bust, which of course was modeled on Mount Rushmore in the United States. Although in Mount Rushmore, they have more than one president. This one was only one. And in '86, it is a pity that some rather rabid people blasted the bust. It is what we would call today cancel culture. So they tried to erase, Marcos's face from it. And with this folly, we actually missed out on a teaching lesson. Because by keeping it, we are not remembering Marcos in a good way, or maybe we can remember Marcos for some of his good qualities and also some of his not so good qualities, or maybe we should remember that Marcos and martial law are things that we hope will not be repeated again. So we have missed a teaching moment. Marcos is a controversial figure in Philippine history because his long shadow affects us more than 3 decades after he died in exile in Hawaii. I come from a generation known as martial law babies who came of age during martial law, 1972 to 1981. And to tell you frankly, I grew up not knowing any other Philippine president when I was a boy, but Ferdinand Marcos. I actually even thought that Marcos came with Malacanang's furniture. So I come from that generation. So in a sense, not only to me, Marcos has actually etched himself on the landscape of memory and Philippine history. And he did that by putting his image on iconic things, everyday things like postage stamps, which we don't use anymore. He put his profile on paper money. He put his profile on coins. Remember, we had a 5 peso coin. There was a gold coin which did not really circulate. So Marcos really liked this profile of himself, complete with his pomaded hair. And it is quite uncanny when you think of it that when they divided the North and created Kalinga and Apayao, if you look at the map, you will actually see that it actually resembles Ferdinand Marcos's profile. So whether this is a coincidence or this was made by design, again, I leave you to your imagination. But then you also have to realize that Marcos was one of the first presidents to do some new ways of campaigning. And here he used what was the most powerful tool at the time, which was the movies. Okay, when he ran against Diosdado Macapagal for the presidency, they did not just campaign physically. I mean, everyone really knows that Marcos's secret weapon was his beautiful wife who would sing. They would sing at a drop of a hat. They had posters like this. And it also became a battle of biographies. Diosdado Macapagal, Marcos first got a book called For Every Tear a Victory by Hartzell Spence, an American writer. So Macapagal in 1965, which was the period of election, commissioned Quentin Reynolds and this Jeffrey Boca to write Macapagal, the Incorruptible. And then in 1969, the Spence biography was reissued as Marcos of the Philippines because he was already president. Macapagal used film. So there were films about the Macapagal story and Tagumpay ng Mahirap. And it showed the stars of the day. So what happened here, Macapagal had a 63 film and a 65 film. So Marcos decided we must make our own film. So they did Iginuhit ng Tadhana. And probably it might have been a film that nobody would have watched. But then it gained traction because it was banned by the censors, by the sitting government. A mistake, I guess, of some overzealous Macapagal functionary that made people more curious about a film they probably would not have watched. But because it's banned, you want to watch it more. I learned about this. I was so surprised that the legal team that argued the case of censorship was headed by then Juan Ponce Enrile, who engaged a young lawyer who we now know or later knew as Edgardo Angara. So because of the controversy, the film became a hit and it helped in the Marcos campaign. So much later, in the next election, they also made another film of Marcos calling it Pinagbuklod ng Langit. So we have here pictures of, on the left, the real Marcos family. The children are still small. And then on the right, you have the real REEL Marcos family, which is Gloria Romero, Luis Gonzalez, and the the actress who played Aimee, the young Aimee, was Vilma Santos, who is now a member of Congress. Speaking of films, though, a film was made in 1969 called Maharlika. That was played. Well, the star was this bombshell actress named Dovie Beams, who we all know later had an affair with Ferdinand Marcos, a very torrid and a public affair. Simply because uh, not only was it a scandal, but Marcos was actually, if it is true, I have the recording, which I'm not playing today, of Marcos having sex with Dovie Beam. So you hear the creaking bed, and then the funniest part of it is that he sings Pamulinawen to Dovie Beams. Okay. And so in later life, the Marcoses have continued to hold the attention of the people, especially Imelda Marcos. So there was a musical that was based on Imelda Marcos, Here Lies Love, and here they actually got Mark Bautista to play Ferdinand Marcos. So again, we see them here in their topless glory. Okay. So long before this year's elections, the Marcoses have upped the ante. So what they used was biographies before and film. Now elections have moved further, and now our elections are fueled by TikTok, YouTube, and other sorts of things. And here, I guess you have seen it. There are lots of postings on this mythical Marcos gold. So many 100 tons of gold that is more than all the gold that we know in the world. And the equally mythical golden age of the Philippines that they call martial law. One of the things that has always hounded then President Marcos was also his war record. He claimed that he actually delayed the fall of Bataan by 3 months. He claimed that he's the most decorated war hero of World War II, and that the Distinguished Service Cross was pinned on Marcos by MacArthur himself. I saw the State Department papers on the Marcos visit to the Lyndon Johnson White House, and it seems that the Malacanang press office sent to Washington a picture of Marcos's medals, and somebody in the State Department looked at all the medals, and they sort of looked at, there's certain medals here that we have no record that he ever got. And when Marcos went to Washington, one of his requests was, I lost my medal. Can I get a replacement during the state visit? And Marcos requested that the President of the United States would pin it on him in the White House. And this is where we see the State Department telling the White House, we have no record of Marcos ever receiving this medal, but because he is a state visitor and we need him, yes, you can give the medal, but you will not pin it on him. It will be given to him in a box, in a private way. So the medals was a big thing, and depending on the source, the medals range from 22, 25, 27 to 32. But according to Rico Jose, who is the Filipino historian, the expert on World War II, he says many of Marcos's medals were actually campaign medals, which were given to all veterans after the war. So you have to look at the medals. Like many medals were awarded in 1963, 4 were given on the same day. Anyway, so Marcos got what he wanted. The State Department and the military gave in, even if there was no record of Marcos receiving a medal, but it was given to him in a box. As late as 1982, when Marcos visited the US the second time, the US Defense Secretary presented Marcos with a glass case containing, again, the medals that he is supposed to have received. Okay? This is a picture of Mrs. Marcos's house of memory, I call it. In my last visit in 2017, I took pictures, and there is a bust of Marcos wearing his medals. Now, when we think about it, Andres Bonifacio tells us that we should fear history because with history, no secret remains secret. So in January of 1986, weeks before the snap elections, the front page of the New York Times carried a story of Marcos's wartime role, which was discredited by an American historian named Alfred McCoy, who was going through the archives, and he found the dossier that shows that Marcos was lobbying for medals, and there was some problems with his paperwork. Anyway, so those are the things that we know about today historically, and things that have been proven. So should we let history decide? What we know of Marcos, because of the material, is basically stuff that Marcos has printed himself. No, the Marcos years, and to put it in a capsule, just to refresh your memory, Marcos was a congressman from 1949 to 1959, thrice elected representative of Ilocos. No, there was a whirlwind courtship that led to marriage to Imelda Marcos, Imelda Romualdez in 1954. He was senator from 1959 to 65 and Senate president from 63 to 65. He won his first term in 1965, no? And he was re-elected in 1969. No? Contrary to popular belief, everyone keeps saying that Marcos was the only president ever re-elected. Actually, Quezon had 2 terms as president from 1935 to 41 and 41 to 43, which they extended until he died of TB in April 1944. So Marcos is not the only one who was re-elected. Quezon did that before him. But he beats everyone else because he was elected again to another term in 1981 and had a 4th inaugural in 1986, shortly before he fled the palace into exile to Washington, to Hawaii. Now, I'd like to think that Marcos read Churchill a lot and fashioned himself on Churchill, who was a statesman, was also a writer. And Churchill wrote the history of the English-speaking peoples, and Churchill is quoted to have said that history will be kind to me because I intend to write it myself. Okay, and he did so. He wrote a multi-volume history of the English-speaking peoples. Not to be outdone, Marcos' name appears on a multi-volume history of the Philippines called Tadhana, the history of the Filipino people. And there were many books published by the government in handsome editions like this, vital documents on the proclamation of 1081. So, and Marcos appears as the author of many, many other books like Democratic Revolution, etc. So, to frame our talk to them, sorry for the long digression, but in one of the last interviews he gave to Playboy magazine in 1987, it covered many topics. And so people read through it. But what struck me in this Playboy interview was that Marcos declared in 1987, history is not done with me yet. So we go and look first at presidential papers. Okay, in the United States, the public papers of the presidents of the United States have been published since 1957, and these are available online. There are documents, photographs, proclamations, executive orders, even a digest of the President's Day. This makes the task of history writing easy because at least the official record of what a president does is available online. Okay, and to date, there are 15 presidential libraries and museums that not only give a glimpse into the life and times of a particular US president, but also focus on the US presidency. So by the US actually pay to uh, to classify and make available papers of the presidents and memorabilia of the presidents in these different presidential libraries. We do not have the same system in the Philippines. So a historian has to go through different places. One would think that the Malacanang Records Office should be the archive. And maybe if there's too much paper, every time one administration leaves, I think most of the records of a presidency should be transferred legally to the National Archives. That will determine what will be kept and what will be discarded. But today, you have to go to different places. The Quezon papers are in the National Library. The Laurel papers are in their foundation in the Lyceum. Rojas papers are in UP. The Quirino papers are in the Ayala Filipinas Heritage Library. Diosdado Macapagal's papers are partly in UST, partly in his house in Forbes Park. I do not know where his daughter, Mrs. Arroyo's papers are, but as you know, she has recently published her memoirs. The Aquino papers, Cory and Noynoy, are in the Aquino Center in Tarlac. Fidel Ramos has most of his papers on his presidency and his military record in the basement of his house in Alabang. And things after the presidency are in an office in Makati. Erap Estrada, I don't know where the papers are. Now, some years ago, I visited Fidel Ramos, and you can see he is a pack rat. No, there's so much papers on his table. He's classifying, which is great. And I was supposed to do some writing on him, but I was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of material that Ramos has collected. And just to give you an idea what it is like, so I would write to Ramos. This was after his presidency, and then he would send back, with different colors of ink. And according to people who worked with him, Ramos had different colors of ink depending on what was important, what's not important, which will go here, which will be shredded, which will be filed. It's very, very organized. So, but until now, a real biography of Ramos remains to be written. But what should be public and what should be private? As you know, there was a controversy over Hillary Clinton's email because all government officials should use an official government server. But she sometimes used her personal email account, and the lawyers argued that many of the emails that she used her personal server for were personal in nature. But again, it's a big question on what should be public and what should be private, and under the freedom of information, what should be available to us. Now, to give you an idea also, when I was in government, I would receive some communication from Malacanang. So you would have a memo like this, and it would come with a cover letter, this frightening piece of paper that said this is confidential, unauthorized disclosure of the contents, etc., will lead to legal action, etc. I worked 9 years with Mrs. Arroyo, and unlike Fidel Ramos or Ferdinand Marcos, who wrote directly onto documents that they sent out, Mrs. Arroyo would write on post-it. And the post-it was sent to you separately. So again, the big question there is, a document will remain clean because the president wrote the notation on another piece of paper. So often when I would receive this, I would have to call, can you please confirm that this post-it that is sent to me came from the document that you sent? So again, these are the things. And today, you text, you call, the paper trail is not as great as it used to be. So the big question now for the Philippines is, should Philippine presidential materials be kept either in the archives, the National Library, or the Malacanang Museum? That has not been settled yet. Okay? So, as a historian, we always complain when there is very little material. And in the case of Ramos, for example, you will also complain when there is too much material. So we'll go into the Marcos Diaries. The story is quite interesting. No? In early 2012, I received a message on Facebook saying, would you be interested in having a copy of the Diaries of Ferdinand Marcos? Okay, fine. Yes, how do I get this? And the person said, can you meet me in the National Bookstore Glorieta and carry something like 4,200 pesos, including centavos? There was an exact amount. Please bring this amount because that is the cost of the photocopying. So he gave a date and a time, and I was too scared to go. So I sent my yaya over with the money, and she came back with a big stack of papers. And when I opened it, it looked like this. They were actually transcriptions, which I think later these were transcriptions made by the late Ricardo Manapat, author of Some Are Smarter Than Others and later director of the National Archives. We do not know what sources he used for the transcription, but this is one of the sets of the Marcos Diaries. So when I received this, I thanked the guy on Facebook. I said, thank you very much for sending me this, but I cannot use this because it's transcribed. I don't know who you are. I don't know where this came from. So thank you very much. And the guy said, do you want the handwritten version? I said, is it available? He says, yes, but it will cost you much more. Then, of course, I said, never mind. So what happened was, I kept this in my file for a year, maybe 3 years. And then one day, because I write for the Inquirer, some days I have nothing to write. So one September, around September 21, I said, why don't I write about martial law from the Diaries of Ferdinand Marcos? So I looked at September 1972, wrote a column, and then Manolo Quezon, who was working in Malacanang, sent me a message and said, what is the source of your column today? I said, well, somebody sent me these things. I don't know where they came from. And he says, part of the things you wrote about are not in the Malacanang copies. So would you be kind enough to send us some material? So to cut the long story short, Manolo Quezon arranged through his office in Malacanang that the two historians, Mr. Quezon and myself, exchanged materials with both Malacanang and the Presidential Commission on Good Government, the PCGG. So we all shared our sources, and eventually what I did was I had to use this and I had to check. Okay, now just to give you an idea what these things look like, both Malacanang and PCGG provide photocopies. The Malacanang set on the left comes in binders, the ring binders, black plastic ring binders, and they're arranged chronologically. And you will see here the paper is yellowed because I guess it's the way that it was photocopied. The PCGG has clearer photocopies. The PCGG claims, although I have not gone there to actually look at them, that they actually have custody of the originals. Okay, but everyone who has had a copy of the Marcos Diaries are all using photocopies. But since I am using Malacanang and PCGG, we can presume that these are official government record. Okay. So the big question is, where are the originals? The first person to use these diaries was an American journalist named William Rempel, who published in 1983 Delusions of a Dictator, and he talked about the diaries, okay? And it was republished as an ebook in 2013. Rempel says that he received about 2,500 pages of photocopied documents from a source, unnamed source, and he will not name this person who has given it to him. And we presume that Rempel's copies are probably the copies that the PCGG actually has. The book is interesting, but what he does is he just gets the most juicy parts of the diaries and wrote them up. But what I think is most important is that for historians and for the historical record, that the whole diary will be printed. So far, I have collated my set, my edited set of the diaries come from 6 different sources that are listed below. Uh, number 1 to number 5 are practically all in PCGG. However, some years ago, when I thought I had finished collating the Marcos diaries, the lawyer of Eugenia Apostol, the founder of the Inquirer, called me up. Please come to our law office. So I went to Tech Type. I sat in a room, and then they handed me a box. I said, yes, what is this? So I opened it, and it was a set of Marcos's handwritten diaries, again, photocopied. And then the lawyer said, well, Mrs. Apostol said that she wanted you to have this, okay, being a historian. So I got it, and I thought, it's the same as the rest. But then when we collated, we found out that there are many pages in the Apostol set that are not in the other pages. But what is important here is that Mrs. Apostol photocopied this herself in Malacanang in February of 1986. So she had first dibs on the material. Now, I saw on one of the Marcos Facebook pages that in October 2017, Juan Ponce Enrile presented to Bongbong Marcos the diaries of his father. Again, photocopies. So you can see here, there's text and there's pictures. And if you will look at it, the diary that Enrile gave Mr. Marcos fits in a shopping bag. This is not the set that I have 2,000 pages. So the thing here is, what is this set? And I have requested through his sisters to be given access to this so that I can collate and check with what I already have. But so far, they have not answered at all. Okay, so look at that thing. So what we have done is we collated the materials, we checked the transcriptions, made new transcriptions, and so that the people who are reading it will know what it is, we annotated whenever possible each date that Marcos writes with relevant documents from the official gazette. Speeches that Marcos does. There is a thing called the President's Week and the President's Day. So it tells you officially who Marcos saw, what he did on particular days, so that then we get try to form an idea of what Marcos's day was like. So the diaries, sometimes he will just write names and you don't know who these people are. So the official gazette gives us the names of the people he met. But many of the diary entries, of course, are not official record. I started to check the entries with newspapers of the time going, and I finished only 1969 and 70. Then the pandemic came. So 2 years we have not been able to do it. But again, the edition will really work because now that we have computers, it will be able to be searched if we create an index and there is cross-referencing. Okay. So the transcription and notes run over 3,500 pages. And just to give you a sense of what is available, Marcos started his diary on January 1, 1970, the dawn of the new year, the beginning of his second term as president. The diary entries are handwritten on Malacanang stationery and run daily. He wrote every day from January 1, 1970 till November 1973. And then after that, there's the gaps sort of occur. And the last entry we have is March 31, 1984. So the big question there was Marcos too busy to write from December 19 73, or were the missing entries lost or destroyed as it passed through different hands from February 1986 when it was found in Malacanang and later entrusted to the custody of the PCGG. What I have noticed also is that I asked, why isn't the PCGG set complete? So when we did our collation, we would see that certain pages are in Malacanang, some pages are in Manolo Quezon, some pages are in Mrs. Apostol's collation. So we tried to fix that. And our count is that about 138 pages, because Marcos put a page number on each page of the diary. About 138 pages are missing from all the sources. So where are these papers, or are there more? We do not know. So we are only working with what is at hand. So we now know the pages that are missing from all the different collections. My problem here also is that the attachments and related material were separated by the PCGG from the actual diary entries. So, for example, look at this. Marcos, like a lawyer, would write, for example, look here, he says, I enclosed the papers for this in envelope XXXIV4. It's like he's doing legal documents. The conference with General Ver and others is placed in envelope XXX4A. So where are these? So again, the diary will not be complete until we can put all these attachments together. Then what I did was I tried to find other sources, and we found sources in the United States from the State Department website, that gave a lot of documents, so which are declassified. So now you have some of the telegrams from the U.S. Embassy in Manila reporting on Marcos or reporting on the situation in the Philippines. So some of these things we have attached in the text as footnotes, and some we have downloaded from the New York Times, and also put them as footnotes. In the US, I first saw this in the 1980s. It's in microfilm form. It's in, I don't know if we have it in the Philippines. No, it is called the National Security Archive. And these are State Department papers, the declassified State Department papers on the Marcos period. And it has over 23,000 pages in microfiche. Cables, briefing papers, memos, photographs, etc. And it's all White House, State Department, CIA, etc. It's all there. What is quite interesting here is that in the US, we have the Freedom of Information Act. As you can see here, December 2016, this is the record. In the Philippines, they asked for cabinet members SAL-Ns. So when you request it, somebody will redact or cross out things which they think are sensitive. So in the Marcos National Security Archive, the US would ask for a document on Marcos, and someone in the State Department would redact and remove things. And what the National Security Archive did was, 2 or 3 months later, they would request the same document again. And then a different person will redact. So when they have 3 or 4 different documents, you put it together, then you will be able to get the whole document. I mean, that's the way that they did it. Anyway, so these are the things that need to be done to make the Marcos diaries clear. Now we go to the meaty part, Marcos in his diaries. So you can see here, Marcos says on January, and you can see 1969, he crossed it out and put 1970. It's like us when you write a check at the beginning of the year, you make a mistake in the year. And he says here, I start a daily written record of my second term in office as president. This will be kept in loose leaf so that all kinds of materials may be attached to the binder. Thus, the background shall be a treatise on the elections of 1969, etc., etc. So from the opening text, you can see that the diary was written basically as notes for future use. Either he would print this as is himself, or they were notes for an autobiography or notes that would be given to a biographer much later. Therefore, the diaries, you have to remember, are a biased, self-referential record, and they should be read with extreme caution. They should be validated all the time. Uh, as a primary source, because some people say if they're unreliable and you have to be careful, why should we read it? But I think that as a primary source to the historian, all documents have to be read with caution. But this is quite interesting because the diaries provide a personal view or a front page, a front row seat to the presidency of Mr. Marcos. Now, let me give you an example. 1970, he was talking about who is the next generation that would replace him, and he says there is not one among the younger generation who you can build up as president. I mean, how can that happen? Maybe he was not looking hard enough. And here he describes the different people, and when I read this the first time, I laughed and then I said, can we publish this? Because some of the statements are actually libelous. So Marcos describes, among the nationalistas, Gil Puyat and Fernando Lopez, his vice president, he said, were too old. Arturo Tolentino had a background of promiscuity, although he ran with him in 86. Jokno is self-centered and lacks humility. I mean, all the things he wrote about the people he didn't like. Among the liberals, Gerardo Rojas is a weakling. Ninoy Aquino he described as a congenital liar, a braggart, and a compulsive chatterbox. You can imagine three descriptions of one person. So he really hated Aquino a great deal. This is worse. Genaro Magsaysay is supposed to be brainless. And he had a beef with Jovito Salonga, who he described as a petty, pompous, sanctimonious fraud. 4 adjectives, again. So again, it's these things that spice it up, but it also gives you a sense of what the politics was like at the time. All the stories of Marcos and all histories all have a point of view. Okay. On martial law, for example, we all know the date, September 21, 1972. That is the date of the document, but that is not the date when it was actually implemented. When you look through the diaries, you see that very, very early, September 7, 1972, he mentions contingency plans. He talks about finishing all papers needed for a possible proclamation of martial law, just in case it is necessary to do so. In September 8, he says, I conferred with Secretary Ponce Enrile and General Ver on the need to prepare for early attempt of the Maoists to terrorize Manila. But, this is already 72. But if you will look, as early as 1970, he's already contemplating martial law. And in one speech, he actually says that even when he was a law student, he already was studying the powers, the emergency powers that are given to a sitting president. Okay, September 9, Ponce Enrile and I finished the material for a possible proclamation of martial law. And he worked on it from 6 to 7:30 p.m. I mean, so they're working on the legalities of it. Okay, September 10, it is my birthday. I am 55 years old. I feel more physically and mentally robust than in the past decade and have acquired valuable experience, energy, and wisdom. So this is how he saw himself. And then September 13, he says, I may have to declare martial law soon. And he's meeting with different people. And when you look at it, they all agreed that the date would be September 21, or September 21 would be their deadline. Okay. But then Ninoy Aquino exposed what he called Oplan Sagittarius, which was the preparation for the proclamation of martial law, what Marcos called his contingency plan. And he just said, no, this is coordination in case of insurgency. And he says that he was actually happy that Ninoy Aquino brought it into the Senate because then it will get people used to the idea of emergency powers. So you see this. In September 14, he says, I intend to declare martial law to liquidate the communist apparatus, reform the government, and have the CONCON ratify our acts. So, I mean, these are the things that you have to look at. But months before, the Holy Week of 1972, Marcos actually had a retreat in Baguio with the Jesuits. And during this retreat, Holy Week retreat, he claims that God talked to him and gave him the go signal. He asked God for a signal. Should I declare martial law? And God gave him the signal. I mean, again, Marcos actually claims that he would hear voices, that would tell him what to do for the best of the country. So again, if we look at these texts, you will see many references to martial law. Okay. There is a time that when things were very tense, Marcos moved out of Malacanang and moved into what is now known as the Goldenberg Mansion. It's down the road. It's owned by the Marcos Foundation. It used to be used as the state guest house. Very beautiful building that, I mean, even if he was not president anymore, he would live on the same street and in a house more sumptuous than Malacanang itself. Okay, September 18, he says, we finalized the plans for the proclamation of martial law. They agreed. The earlier we do it, the better, because the media is waging a propaganda campaign that distorts and twists facts. So when you think about it, distortion, twisting of facts, these things are not new. It was already there 50 years ago. Okay, an Enrile report that Ninoy met with Joe Masison was released to the press. So there was accusation and counter accusation. And by September 20, Marcos already says that the martial law decree was already typed out. They didn't have, things were done in a manual typewriter. A list of target personalities were drawn up, but Marcos says, I could not sign the proclamations because they had to be retyped. September 21, the date of the proclamation, the US ambassador actually asks Marcos point blank, are you going to declare martial law? And Marcos writes in his diaries that he and Imelda denied it. But the diary mentions, you can see the diary days before, you can see that everyone is at work, typing, retyping, updating the proclamation of martial law. Okay? Then you have the great Enrile ambush in Wakwak on September 22, and Marcos used this as the, he says, this makes the martial law proclamation a necessity. Okay? So the funny part here is that in 1986, Enrile said the ambush was staged. It never happened. But in 2012, in Enrile's memoirs, he then goes back and says the ambush was real. It is ironic that the Enrile memoirs was actually published by ABS-CBN Publishing, and Oscar Lopez, who lived down the road from the ambush, recounted that that night he was with his children. They could hear a lot of shooting, and then when it died down, they went out. They saw the car riddled with bullets. Nobody was hurt. There was no blood. So this is the point. Enrile himself gives us two different versions of the story. And he is the primary source. He will say, I was there. I'm the one speaking. So which Enrile do we believe? The story from 86 or the story from 2012? That is the challenge that a historian faces. So when was martial law actually implemented? Marcos actually spoke to the Philippine Historical Association in November of 1972. And he actually tells them this, that because you are historians, I will tell you what happened. And he said, I signed 2 copies. Only 2 copies were made. One copy was supposed to be signed on September 17, but it is dated September 21. So the official document is 21, and we all know that Marcos was suspicious about numbers. So he wanted, all important acts to be done on a date that fell on a 7 or multiples of 7. So 21 is 3 times 7. Then he says that he actually signed it on the 17th, but signed it as for the 21st, and then he kept the copy because he wanted to make sure that, so it was not to be implemented, but it was already signed. So he wanted to make sure. Then eventually he says that if proclamation is meant, my appearing on television and saying martial law is enforced, that was September 23, when he officially said martial law is in place. But he says the document was written in 1917, was finished in September 17, but dated September 21. So Marcos then says in this address to the historians, even before the ambush on Secretary Enrile, I had already ordered the enforcement of the proclamation. Long before that, I had decided to proclaim martial law. So again, is that why did they need the ambush if Marcos pala already had? So again, even Marcos himself has many different sides to him, and the diaries are just one way of looking at it. Okay, so I checked. The Marcos address to the historians does not match the diary entries. Marcos claimed that he wanted to communicate with God to ask whether it was correct to declare martial law or not. He asked for a sign, and he says this, I was being led and guided by some strange greater mind above me, and I felt and knew it. Again, it is rather dangerous when you have somebody who claims that God communicates with him directly. Anyway, so the big question here is, did Marcos have a sense of history, or was it all megalomania? Okay. You must remember that some years ago, we had the Philippine Post published stamps, although nobody uses stamps anymore, commemorating the 100th birth anniversary of Ferdinand Marcos. A copy of Marcos's birth record issued in 1998 on the request of a certain Melvin Cuesta. When you look at this, it shows that, okay, when you look at it, the year of birth is 1916. So is this a clerical error, or did Marcos even fake the year of his birth to get number 7? At the time, I asked Amy Marcos about this, but received neither a confirmation nor a denial. Okay, so what can we do? I mean, I'm sorry, we only have an hour, so I'm just giving you the background of how we are working on the Marcos diaries. But I want to end by talking about the uses and abuses of history. Okay, so the diaries give us Marcos's side of the story. For whatever it is, Marcos is still a primary source. So whether he's lying, he's mistaken, or for whatever reason, the Marcos diaries form the primary sources for any historian who is working on the period. But because it is Marcos's side of the story, we have to remember that the diaries are biased and self-referential. Okay? When I read this, my biggest fear was that if I publish this, because it's not my period, my period is the 19th century, but this just fell on my lap. And I was thinking, will my reputation be strong enough to withstand the flack that will come with the publication of the diaries? Because as far as we are concerned, the pro-Marcos people will say that I'm anti-Marcos because I correct Marcos's diaries. Then the people who are anti-Marcos will say naman that I am too light on him. So I'm caught in the middle. But I realized, in the last decades, that it is so easy for us to demonize Marcos and martial law, and a bit more difficult to put Marcos into context. The late Teodoro Agoncillo used to say you have to wait 15, 20 years in order to get to be as far enough to be impartial. But with Marcos, it seems, the emotions run very strong, and this clouds our historical research. What scares me here is that the diaries make historical figures human, the same way that I made Rizal human. In some respects, it's like I don't want Marcos to become human. Because when you read the diaries, one of the things you will realize is that when he's writing about his enemies, Chino Roses, Eugenio Lopez, Jose Maria Sison, Ninoy Aquino, there's so much vile and vitriol. But then when he talks about his family, the tone changes. Now, when he talks about Imelda, the tone actually changes, becomes gentle. And then you see, this is Marcos. No, he's like a real a doting father. No? But again, it softens what Marcos should be. No? So when I last visited Mrs. Marcos, she showed me some of the memorabilia in her house. Even this this autographed photograph. You could see that officially he was very nice to her. But again, what about Dovey Beams? And when I looked at the Dovey Beams entries in the Marcos diaries, he completely denies, I don't know that woman. That woman was a CIA plant to embarrass me, etc. She's a blackmailer. But that is not what we know today. So again, you have to read the diary with great caution. Now and then you have pictures like this. You see pictures like this. We have grown up to see Marcos in the worst possible light. But again, their family life makes them human. And maybe it will help us understand, but I want to let you know what made me turn. I met Mrs. Marcos at a lecture once, and some years ago, I was actually asked to recommend somebody who could write a biography of Mrs. Marcos. And I told then Senator Marcos, why don't I do it? I want to do it myself. And I already had my title at the movies with Imelda Marcos. And what we did, and Amy said, no, my mother is quite forgetful. She's not communicative. This was in 2017. And I said, try me, you come with me. So we went there for merienda. And that first, well, it wasn't supposed to be an interview, but the first conversation lasted for over 7 hours, which was taped and videotaped. And we have the transcription. So I was going to do this about I asked Mrs. Marcos, Mrs. Marcos, you knew all US presidents from Lyndon Johnson to Ronald Reagan. And she said, no. I know even the present one was Trump. So she went to a corner of her room and she showed me a picture of herself with Donald Trump. And she laughed. So again, I realized that when I wrote this, that the book would be about her international celebrity. It would be simply her talking about what she remembered. And then I hope you watch the 2019 film called Kingmaker. It's available online. And here, Imelda says perception is real and the truth is not. I realized when I watched this film that we often dismiss Mrs. Marcos as, she's sort of off, over the top, crazy lady. But as you can see, she knows exactly what she was doing. And this is the swan song. I'm into a historian. I met her twice, for an extended conversation. Now, the first conversation was also that 5 to 6 hours. And I remember my first meeting with her after that long 6 hour conversation. When she brought me to the door, Mrs. Marcos said, "You know, Ambet, you didn't ask me any difficult questions." And I said, "Ma'am, you invited me to dinner. This is not the real interview. If I asked you difficult questions, you might not invite me again." And then she looked at me in the eye and she said, "I know you don't believe many of the things I'm telling you, but I appreciate it that you came here and that you allowed me to give you my side of the story." For me, I mean, that was the dangerous part, to listen to their side of the story. So when I realized this now, thinking of it later, now that we're still working on the diaries, I realize now that even a lying, biased source still contains a kernel of truth. And I'm not alone. Earlier historians like William Henry Scott and Renato Constantino all talked about using a biased source and still turning it around to find truth. And that, I think, is the secret of history and the secret of these Marcos diaries, that we will be able to read them well, to find truth in them, and not only to understand the mind that was Marcos, but to understand what it was that made Marcos possible. And if we know that, then hopefully we will not repeat Marcos and martial law all over again. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Ambet, for that very interesting and informative discussion. It must have been a grueling task to sift through such a voluminous collection of handwritten entries. It's like doing a gigantic jigsaw puzzle, putting together all the pieces from the different sources. Marcos obviously had a complex mind and persona. That is probably why I came off feeling more mystified and left wanting for more enlightenment about the former president's diary entries. It seems that many of our attendees feel the same. And to help us guide through the many questions, may we call on our reliable and insightful and ever the page turner, head turner, Ms. Malu Cristobal, the chair of MIB Capital, to moderate our Q&A portion with Professor Ambet Ocampo.
Thank you very much, Marit. Good afternoon to everybody. And thank you, Ambet, for your presentation. It was quite enthralling or riveting, but also a tad unsettling. I mean, here's a president driven out of office, out of power, out of the country, long gone to the great beyond, and here we are resurrecting him or exhuming him through his diaries. If that's not an unsettling situation, I don't know what is. But let me start with taking up from one point that you raised as you were winding up your presentation. We all know that Marcos is wily. I mean, he always had an agenda in everything that he did. It is apparent that through his diaries, he was reshaping our thinking about him and also effectively selling to us his version of history. So why should we allow ourselves to be played? Why should we allow ourselves to fall into his trap by in fact talking about the diary, putting it front and center, and giving it some kind of legitimacy?
Well, the diaries are legitimate, and as I said, while they are biased and self-referential, it gives you, reading it gives you a sense of what are the problems that face a president. So you will see there, there's a jeepney driver strike, the price of gasoline goes up, there is hoarding of rice, corruption in customs and the BIR. So when you see that, those are the same problems we still see today. But it gives you a sense of how he was trying to address the problems of his time. So again, he tries to be, show himself as, doing the best for the country. And sometimes I wonder, maybe he had a second set of diaries where he kept, the records of the Swiss bank accounts and everything
Oh,
else.
for
But the thing
sure.
there is, when you look at it, that is what you see. There are people lobbying for positions in government. There are problems with Speaker of the House or President of the Senate. Marcos has to intervene. What do you do with the Speaker who is not useful to you? I mean, these are the things that we still see today, but we read about it in the news. But here you will see how Marcos is moving through the situations. And I'd like to think that maybe we are kind of harsh because hindsight is 2020. No? So we live in 2022. We're looking at, he should have done this, he should have done that. But you must remember that Marcos is writing this day by day. He did not have the benefit of hindsight. So what we see there basically is what was happening at the time. So it's not all opinion. There is a lot that you will actually find in it. And Marcos actually wanted it as a reflection on power, how to get power, how to maintain power, and how to wield it. And I
As you
think
said, it was
those are the lessons.
self-referential.
Yeah. So,
You did a lot of fact checking, and I would imagine that, as you said, it being self-referential, it's really putting himself in a much better light than what reality might have put him in. That is really presenting alternative facts. The danger of these alternative facts being put across and perhaps being shared, let's say, with the youth who never grew up facing the atrocities of martial law. We are martial law babies.
yeah.
We were there. We had first-hand view of what it was. And then you have this generation who may not know any better. And given alternative facts, how are we then shaping their thinking? And
Yeah.
how do
No,
we
I
parse
think
that information?
yeah, that's true. That's why I think the diaries have to be printed and printed by a historian, because the thing is, bits and pieces of the diary are floating online. No, so depending on what you get, and what you put online, um, it can be out of context. So the point here is to actually print the whole thing whole, and then you put the annotations. For example, in January of 1970, his first term, he made a big thing about, I have created the Marcos Foundation, and I have given all my material possessions to the Marcos Foundation for the advancement of culture, science, education, etc. So a very altruistic act, diba? But when you read the
Exactly.
papers of the 1970s, everyone, totoo ba yan? No, why, palabas mo lang yan. And
So
then when you think about it,
but there's a
yeah,
risk.
but he gave all his, well, officially he gave his all his material possessions to the foundation. But you will know that in 1970, that is when he opened first opened his Swiss bank account. So there is a footnote there that says, yes, he gave away his, well, officially his things, but the footnote will tell you,
So it's your
no, this is the
footnote, it
time
is your annotation,
the
the
annotation
fact
that is
checking
important.
that needs to be read and appreciated side by side with
Side
its
by side. But
self-referential.
unfortunately,
So
nobody
this
reads
diary have
footnotes.
to be, they have to be managed
Yeah,
and disseminated responsibly. Okay, so
yeah.
having through the diaries, quite objectively, will they alter our understanding and appreciation of political life in the 70s?
I think so. And for me, I mean, that was my greatest danger. That we empathize with him at some point. And maybe I think that's something that for the past, since 1986, we have only seen, the anti-Marcos side of the story. So I mean, as a historian, you throw the monkey wrench, and here is the other thing. So with whatever other material that we have, we will be able to write a more truthful, more detailed narrative of the period. But you cannot write it without Marcos's Marcos's side of the story. So I mean, it makes things. A historian cannot be objective. No, we're always subjective, but we try to be fair. So we have to see what he has to say, whether we believe it or not. It's giving him also the chance to explain why he acted the way in which he did.
How do you tread that very delicate balance such that you don't give him a pass? I mean,
That
you
is
know
the
what I
hard
mean?
part. That's the hard part.
Yes.
Yeah, and since this isn't my period, there are many things I don't know about the period. So which is why I think it will be once it is out, especially online, people will be able to comment. People will be able to say things, and then slowly more annotations will come in. But what is interesting, for example, is that now that many U.S. State Department uh, papers are on the Marcoses are already available, then we can also see, I mean, what Washington is saying. No? But there are particular things like, for example, the Tripoli agreement, that was made. Marcos was in Manila and Barbers was in Tripoli. They're talking on the phone, every day. And then you will see in the diary, Marcos will say, I don't agree with Section 3, negotiate to change this to that. So actually, some people who are studying the period say, we want to see that because you will see day by day how that important agreement was made, long distance by telephone. And we don't have that. We only have the document that was signed. But Marcos has a day by day thing about it. But also, there are certain things like, the president's day. They'll say the president was busy today. He did this, he did that. That's officially on record what he did. But there was a day where he had stem cell treatment. Now, Mrs. Marcos and he had to lie on a bed for 3 days and not move. So suddenly you disappear from
But you couldn't
public.
disappear, not
But you
officially.
cannot disappear, diba? So, but then the official gazette, the president is working. He sent a representative to deliver this speech. Yung pala, he's in Malacanang having stem cell treatment. And he was so terrified because I think it was his mother who first got stem cell treatment that convinced him. He says, "Oh my God, if my mother's like this, she will live forever." But when you look at it, things like that. So officially, he's supposed to be doing so many things, but actually, he was receiving stem cell treatment. So
Do we have a law?
unfortunately, we don't have those. Will we have records of his
Let me
dialysis?
May I just
etc.,
interject because you were talking about records, no? In the U.S., and this was a recent controversy with Donald Trump when he carted with him and brought to Florida, boxes and boxes of documents
yeah.
that he should have turned over to the government because by law, you don't own your documents. They are supposed to be part of, the records of government and of the country. As far as the Philippines is concerned, do we have such a law?
We don't. So actually, who will have the documents? What documents should a president keep, for example? We don't have that. I mean, the US, they're very, very, they think of everything. It's like even gifts that are given to the president.
Yes,
So
up to a
anything
certain
over
amount.
something, over $25 yata, you cannot
You
own.
can
It
keep
is
and then the
presumed,
rest you turn
it is
over.
given.
Or you buy.
At the end of your term, you buy it. Diba? But here,
Yes.
you keep everything. So who determines what is personal and what is not? But as I mentioned there, Marcos comes from a generation when they're still writing. So there is a literal paper trail. But today, with texting, with email, with the cell phone, you don't need to write anymore because you'll call somebody and that's lost forever, unless there is a recording, or like I showed you, Mrs. Arroyo would write her notes on Post-it. So the document is clean, but Marcos all the way up to FBR, they wrote directly on the communication. So if those things are kept, then you will see how a president is acting,
Yes,
no,
correct.
or
Let me
thinking.
now go to the questions from our participants. There was a question that was sent to me much earlier, so I'm going to do it sequentially. And this one is from Renan Piamonte, and he says, "What do you think should be the role of historians in educating our people about the realities of martial law? In Germany, teaching about the Holocaust and the Nazi era is mandatory. Here in the Philippines," Renan says, "a sizable part of the population believes the myths of the Marcos regime." Your thoughts?
Well, the thing there is, the historians are doing their job. It's the textbooks that have to be rewritten, and historians don't write
Why
textbooks.
don't
Those
the
are written by
historians lobby with
they're
the
they're
Department of
written
Education?
by Department of Education, and I the history textbooks that we are using still use the material that was made in the martial law period. So when you read it, it always says martial law was declared to save the republic. That hasn't been updated yet. So it's
But
officially
don't you find
still
that
there.
historians should take it upon themselves? Shouldn't you, as a historian, take it upon yourself to push
Well,
harder with the Department of Education
I
to help
tried.
the mistakes of the
Yeah,
history books?
when we had I'll tell you this, that when we had the K to 12, I was supposed to go over the Araling Panlipunan material before it was finalized. They said, can you come for 1 week in Tagaytay and we'll thresh it out. So I committed. I said, yes, I'll come for 1 week. Can I have the material, please? And when they sent it to me, it was still the material that we all complained about. So I said,
Mm.
why is this like this? I thought we already agreed. Have you shown this to Maris Jokno, who was my successor at the Historical Commission? And then a day later, an undersecretary of education calls me not the clerk, and says, can you just come na lang next week, and
Mm.
we'll discuss it? And I said, if I go next week, you have already finalized what we
Yes,
should actually be discussing. So it ended
nothing
there.
happened.
So nothing
But it's
happened.
never
So
too
we're
late,
still stuck
Ambet.
with it.
You
I
just have
think
to
it's
keep on
never too
trying.
late, but
Yes,
you need political will, and you must
true.
realize as business people that education is a business. So it's run also by little publishing firms. We have no control about who is writing the textbooks. Unlike our parents, they all used one single
Mm.
textbook. So they all know Pepe and Pilar. Tayo hindi, iba-iba depending on your
Memo to the
school.
business associations,
Di
look
ba?
at this
So
as a possible
you
advocacy to
possible.
pursue.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a raised hand from Uni. Uni, I'll call you. Let me just ask one question in the chat box and then I'll get you to raise your question. Okay, here's a question from Beng San Juan. Am I right to understand that what are accessible are only photocopies? If yes, who would have the original copies?
Okay. I talked to my colleague who knows more about Marcos than me, and spent most of his life digging through the PCGG. And he says, I have seen the actual documents. The
Original.
originals are in the PCGG, but as you know, they're going to close the PCGG. So what's going to happen to the material? Where will that go? No? And he was the one who told me that there was a filing system. So instead of putting all the documents together as they were originally filed, someone had the bright idea of file, because you must remember PCGG was created to run after
After the
the
Marcos.
Marcos wealth. So
Yes.
what happened was things that they needed for particular cases were separated.
Mhm,
Instead of
mhm.
what I think they should have done was make a photocopy, but still keep things where they were found. They're filed as they were found. But unfortunately, that's why it is double trouble, because again, now we have the diaries, and then we have to find all the attachments. And it
Yes.
was not only attachments that Marcos put in. Sometimes in the photocopies, there are certain things that get in. A letter to Amy when she went to school. Or there was a memo to Roman Cruz. I think he was head of SSS, and then he made a press release about something he did, and then
And
Marcos
Manila
actually said,
Hotel.
don't you ever do that. Everything emanates from me. No, everything that you will do should be credited to me. No,
micromanaging.
so when you see that, it's not only micromanaging, but it's creating this image. It's part of the
Yes.
myth making. No?
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
Marcos
Ano
has a
siya eh.
very
Siya si
strong
Malakas
sense of
eh. And
history.
Imelda was the maganda. Oh, Uni,
Maganda. And
short and sweet, your
he knew
question.
that. No? He knew that. Yeah.
Yes. I'll
Yes,
get
please,
Uni to
Uni.
ask her question. Yes, Uni.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, I will digress a bit. Okay, we have to believe in some numbers. And I have political analyst friends which said that they haven't seen these ratings of a presidential candidate ever before, whether we believe the rating or not. Let me just stick to that. And they said that even Duterte did not reach this high rating. Now, my question is, you, after reading through these materials, you mentioned there maybe in the books there was still some incorrect data or what. I am still also amazed, or what you call, or baffled, whatever term you call it, if this is a phenomenon, why is it? And I have spoken to a lot of people, my driver, my hairdresser, etc. They are convinced of Bongbong Marcos. So may I ask you, after reading through these materials, what do you think is the reason behind this phenomenon of the popularity of the son? I'm sorry if I'm digressing. I'm just getting
Yes,
your
it's a bit of a
opinion.
digression, but we'll get Ambet to answer short and sweet. So
No,
we
I mean,
go
it's
back to the Marcos
I think
papers.
I mentioned that in the beginning. If you remember, everything was done in order to win an election. And if you, I don't know if you caught the beginning of the lecture where I told you how I mentioned how in the electoral fight between Marcos and Diosdado Macapagal, they commissioned writers to American writers to write their biographies. They produced film. That was the internet of the age. No? So instead of just campaigning as Quezon did, they used the power of media. They used film. They used radio. And in a sense, when you look at it now, this is what the Marcos campaign has done. They really used social media in a great way, to create buzz around him. So our main problem now is that the internet was created to connect people, but it now actually divides us. The internet was supposed to be a source for learning, for the advancement of knowledge, but what has happened was because anyone can just publish anything on the internet. Our main problem is sifting now, finding what is valid or true or valuable in the internet, which is drowned out by so much noise. People don't. The former gatekeepers of information used to be media, used to be government, it used to be academia. All those have been discredited. So what I mean, our people now will not read the newspaper. Where did they get their news? From Twitter. That's 200 characters. So and as you know, social media posts are not meant for knowledge. They're meant to agitate. They're meant to make people react. So they're emotional rather than factual. So it's the age in which people have grown up today.
So how are historians stepping up to be able to address this phenomenon brought about by social media?
Yeah, I mean, Uni is correct, but academic
As a
historians
historian,
have
what can
always
you do
been
about it?
academic historians have always been wary of the dangers of popularization. My work has not been, in the beginning, was much reviled by the academic establishment. The only difference is that from somebody who's just posting from the street is that I'm an academic myself, but academics do not write for the newspapers. They should, but they don't. They write for journals that nobody reads. No,
They're in a
and I mean,
rarefied world.
how
Maybe
many
academics should go down
historians
to
do
the
you have?
level of the...
Yeah, that are on social media. I have a Facebook page. I have an Instagram page. I'm starting a YouTube page.
Yes.
And you know, my colleagues say, "I know, why are you wasting your time?" I said, "Because this is the new arena.
Exactly.
If we do not engage here, we have given it
Yes.
up."
Yes. Yes.
But
Yes.
again, I wish there were more. So to answer Eunice, no, it's really a social media age, and they have really used it to the hill. They came prepared. They came
Yeah.
prepared.
Yeah. That answers Yuni's question. Okay, let me just read a comment that was posted by Chai. And she says the Aquinos did not insist on updating and hammering the martial law years because that to them would be self serving. It backfired. Was the opening for, say, it is said, went to the publishing firms to start on efforts to negate the ugly sides of martial law years. Again, using media to
Yeah.
serve
No,
one's
I
personal
mean the Marcos
self-interest.
Foundation. I was surprised by that. They were very quiet, but I was still in government then, and I went to the National Library. I went to the director's office, and I found stacks of Marcos Marcos books that were being given to the National Library to be distributed to all the public libraries.
Hmm.
So there was a volume on Marcos and economics, Marcos and culture, Marcos and these are the things that are going to. So they were slowly, quietly feeding all of these to. And I mean, it's found in your public library. It's a nicely printed book. You will presume uh, everything in it is correct. So they were really rewriting the narrative very, very early on. And I think also the one of the things that we have to realize, not just with social media, is also the way in which the Marcoses have repackaged themselves. We don't see them as political figures. We see them as celebrities. It starts with Mrs. Marcos. It starts with Jaime Marcos's son, Borgie, who became a model, di ba? Modeling underwear. No, I mean, he was a beautiful boy. So again, it softened our. We started to see them not as this evil thing, but we
That's
started to see
probably
them
why we have
as
more
celebrities.
celebrities in the Senate, in the local,
Yeah.
the LGU level. I guess it is really the way the times have evolved and the access of the electorate to various forms of media, where before they only had the radio and then subsequently the television set. Let me go back to the diaries, which is really where we wanted to focus this webinar, to really look at it as part of history. Um, what were your impressions of you did mention, although it would date you, you mentioned that you're a martial law baby. What were your impressions of Marcos before you read the diaries? And how did your impressions change after reading the diaries?
Well, I grew up, with all the anti-Marcos thing. He's a liar, he's a murderer, he's a tort. Of course, he will not write that in the diary. But as I mentioned,
Maybe he would.
yeah, it was that. No, and that is what I'm scared of. It was empathy. So you start to see it from his point of view. No, I was surprised. Like when he talks about the children, the tone really changes. And at the time, I was still talking. The Marcoses won't talk to me anymore. No, but at the time, I just to confirm. No, I had lunch with Amy Marcos. I said, "Do you have a deviated septum because you fell from a tree? And then your dog's names are these?" So I knew the names of the pets. What their family life was like. And then I said, "Why is it that whenever you do something in school, Marcos would always go to Assumption, pin a medal on her, watch Imy's place?" And Imy smiled and said, "Now you know who the real parent in the family was." No, because the president was a very busy man, but he made time for his family. And for me, what struck me there was the apple of his eye really is Amy. No, always talking a great deal about her. And then there was a line which caught me. He said of Amy one day when he was saying how great she was. Suddenly he says, Amy should have been a boy." No, and sometimes you wonder because Ivy is the one who is the political person in the family. if Bongbong wasn't a junior, maybe he wouldn't be running. No? But again, it's again a mistake. The accident of gender, that made it what it is.
How
But when
should
you look at it,
how
that's what you see.
if how should one read the diaries? Should one read them with cynicism, with an open mind, or with understanding?
I think with all of the above, and you should read not just his version, but you should also read the footnotes so that you get both sides, and you will be able to form an informed opinion, not just something that is comes from bias or what you grew up with. So it is a historical record that should be read as a historical record.
There were two very popular diaries that were peddled around. The Mussolini diaries and the Hitler diaries.
Hitler,
The
which were
Hitler
fake.
diaries and both diaries were deemed to be genuine by experts until they were later proven to be forgeries.
Fake, yeah.
Is there any possibility, any level of probability that these diaries might be forgeries?
No, they are not. Well, one, you really had to write it all the way, and then most of the time, things like this, you will slip on the details, but the details are correct. And I found a 1967 article by Nick Joaquin, who was then writing about the Marcoses, and he actually says, I saw the physical diaries and I was shown, because this was the student revolt in 1970, when the students during the Zona, there was a great student rally and there was a night of violence, and Nick Joaquin claims, I saw the physical diaries, and Nick Joaquin he didn't have a cell phone, so he read it, and I think he had a photographic memory, but he wrote out what he remembered. So the content is the same, but when you put it together, it doesn't match. So we know that he saw it, but again, that for me is the thing. It confirms outside of the family that he was really writing, because the family always says he gave time to write up. So,
we're about 3 minutes away from the conclusion of this open forum. So let me just ask one final question that after all has been said and done on these diaries, what to you is the real value and the proper place of these diaries in our history?
Well, it's not the only one. The thing about it's so easy for me. Like for Rizal, all I have is the 25 volumes that he wrote, and it ends there. But in our age, there is so much information flying around. So the diary is just one thread in this tapestry that is our history. You will have to dig up other things. We have to dig up other memoirs. Unfortunately, like Enrile wrote his memoir. Some parts are questionable, some parts are not. History is based on written record, and that's why Marcos probably said, history is not done with me yet. I will write it myself. So he left us with a time bomb. But the point there is, there are still many other sources that we can use to flesh it out. And I'd like to think one day, a younger scholar should really go to Washington to look up all the cables. And it's not just Washington. I'm sure there are cables in London, cables in France. All your embassies here are sending raw intelligence data home. And by putting all of those together, we will form a clearer picture of the past. So what we are seeing now, the Marcos Diaries is like a snapshot. It's one snapshot. U.S. State
Taken
Department
from
is
a
another
certain
snapshot
angle.
from a certain angle. So it's putting all of these things together. But again, the journey of the 1,000 miles starts with the first step. This is not mine. I'm only publishing this because I think that maybe 20 years from now, when things are cooler, people will look at it with more impartiality and use it. But we will not be able to complete the picture if we will not give Marcos the opportunity to give his side of the story.
Thank you, Beth, and I'm seeing Maret, which is my cue to bring the floor back to Maret.
Thank you, Malu and Professor Ambet, for that very engaging Q&A portion. Malu, you really have what it takes to be a diplomat. Again, thank you, Professor Ambet, for giving us a glimpse of the mind of one of the most controversial leaders in our country's history. Even after all these years, he continues to hold our attention. Whether his historical account of his years in Malacanang are completely true, incomplete, embellished, imagined, or even delusional, as some would say, I leave it up to the discerning minds of our participants to make their judgment. At this point, may we call on our youthful and dynamic president of Phoenix, Mr. Michael Guarin, partner at KPMG, for the closing remarks.
Okay, thank you, Maret. Hopefully everyone can hear me clearly enough. So again, good afternoon, my dear Phoenix members and guests. I can't believe that it's almost 2 hours since we started. It has indeed been a very interesting afternoon. For someone like me who has not even read anything about the FM Diaries or even summaries that have already been made public, it was indeed an eye-opening afternoon. So for that, Ambeth, thank you very much. And also, we'd like to thank you for gracing us with your presence, your knowledge. It definitely helps that you are a professor of history and you continue to build up your knowledge about history, your expert insights, and knowing and appreciating our history, including its highs and lows, will hopefully embolden us to dream of a better future. And by listening to you just now, I'm sure all of us felt like we traveled back in time, seeing events, and as mentioned, a snapshot of the past 40 to 50 years ago, taken from a certain angle, as mentioned by Malu and Ambeth just now. And it was indeed a very memorable trip. It was particularly remarkable that you have had first-hand interaction with some of the most famous personalities of the country. So I liked seeing those pictures you had earlier during your presentation. I do agree that the Marcos name and the entire family will forever be etched in Philippine history, whether we like it or not. So depending on the attendees' age, we do have baby boomers in attendance, martial law babies, and we also have Gen Xers and millennials. If we look at the names who are present here, unless some of us here are really related to the Marcos family, all we have are matters relating to his public persona or reputation, not necessarily the Ferdinand Marcos Sr., the person. I'd like to think that we owe it to him, at least, and that we gained a better understanding of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., the person, through the discussions that we had today. We are definitely looking forward to the series of books, be it online or hardbound, to be released regarding these diaries. We look forward to them. Again, I wouldn't want to let this afternoon pass without thanking the Arts and Culture Committee. Thank you, Maret Bautista, for being our able MC. Opening prayer given by Sonny Aguilar earlier. Our ever-dynamic liaison director, Domingo. Thank you, Domeng. And our committee chair, Attorney Leah San Juan. And of course, to our ever-reliable moderator, Malu Cristobal. Thank you very much for making this a Friday afternoon well spent. And I look forward to future webinars by the committee. And I'd like to invite all of our guests to keep your ear out for future Phoenix events, particularly that of the Arts and Culture Committee. Thank you, and mabuhay ang Phoenix.
Thank you, President Mike Gorin. You know, someone said that the odd thing about a diary is the things you omit are more important than those you put in. So I wonder what important things did Marcos omit in his diaries and why? Professor Ambet has left us with a question, or rather a challenge. Should we let history decide? We hope you all enjoyed today's webinar. As always, please stay safe and stay healthy. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a good weekend, everyone.
We'll have
And
pictures